The PURELL brand, I just was looking at a bunch of the metrics around brand health equity, and it is substantially stronger than it was in 2019. And there are places where it actually is continuing to increase, which is a little counterintuitive coming out of the pandemic. And then our consumer business, our share in consumer has more than doubled since before the pandemic, and the market is substantially larger. We're continuing to innovate there and tell our story. We launched hand sanitizing spray in the last year, which people love. And we really feel like it's our, in some ways it's our golden hour. I mean, the business is doing better than any of us could have even imagined.
Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I had the real pleasure of speaking with Carey Jaros, CEO of GOJO Industries, the makers of PURELL and many other products under the umbrella of their purpose of saving lives and making lives better through well-being solutions. Carey joined GOJO in 2014, originally as a board member, and then held executive roles as Chief Strategy Officer, Chief Operating Officer, before becoming President and CEO in January of 2020. Our conversation today covers Carey's call to lead, shaped by a lifelong passion for solving problems and telling stories. Her reflections on leadership and decision-making, the extraordinary legacy, and the ongoing innovation at GOJO. We discuss GOJO's origins, founded by Goldie and Jerry Lippman in 1946, to address the real human problem of safely cleaning workers' hands in Akron's rubber factories. Carey shares how GOJO has evolved from its roots to become a global leader in hygiene, skincare, and well-being, driven by their unwavering commitment to safety, efficacy, and sustainability. We also delve into the critical moments Carey faced stepping into her role at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the bold strategic investments GOJO made during this unprecedented time, and how the company balances legacy with innovation. Carey provides insights on the importance of culture, rigorous debate, and continuous learning as cornerstones of her approach to leadership. As an operator, investor, and board member, Carey has worked on and in more than 50 organizations over her career. Prior to GOJO, Carey was the president of Walnut Ridge Strategic Management Company and was a vice president at Dealer Tire, a large privately held tire distributor here in Cleveland, Ohio. She spent the first 12 years of her career as a management consultant at Bain & Company. Today, Carey is a board director of Grocery Outlet, a publicly traded NASDAQ corporation, and advisory and board member of venture-backed menstrual product startup OnFlow. She also serves on the boards of the Cleveland Foundation, University Hospitals, and the Laurel School. Carey is an awesome storyteller, and this conversation is filled with wonderful anecdotes and practical wisdom on business and entrepreneurship. So please enjoy it. Lay of the Land is brought to you and is proudly sponsored by Roundstone Insurance. Headquartered in Rocky River, Ohio, Roundstone shares Lay of the Land's same passion for bold ideas and lasting impact from our community's entrepreneurs, innovators, and leaders. Since 2005, Roundstone has pioneered a self-funded captive health insurance model that delivers robust savings for small and medium-sized businesses. They are part of the solution to rising healthcare costs, helping employers offer affordable, high-quality care while driving job creation and economic growth throughout Northeast Ohio. Like many of the voices featured on Lay of the Land, including Roundstone's founder and CEO Mike Schroeder, Roundstone believes entrepreneurship, innovation, and community to be the cornerstones of progress. To learn more about how Roundstone is transforming employee health benefits by empowering employers to save thousands in per employee per year healthcare costs, please visit roundstoneinsurance.com. Roundstone Insurance, built for entrepreneurs, backed by innovation, committed to Cleveland. So I am a fan of reflecting on your career from the perspective of decision trees is how I think about them. Kind of like Robert Frost's The Road Not Traveled poem, where, looking forward, there are many forks in the road. They branch infinitely in all kinds of directions. And it's ultimately dependent on which paths you decide to walk. But when you look back in reflection, the infinite branches from the past converge into the path that you've actually taken. Where you can piece together all those decisions into really, one thread that ties your career together. And so I would like to start there. And if you took us back to, when you were younger, what did you care about? Where were you? What were you passionate about? And ultimately, did you imagine that you'd be doing, this kind of work when you grew up and, running what today is one of the largest hygiene and skincare companies in the world?
Sure. So definitely, I did not imagine that I would be running a skincare company. But if I go way, way, way back, so I grew up in Cleveland. My favorite sort of subjects were always math and English, and I think that paired with sort of what I was most interested in, which was solving problems and telling stories. I think those are the things I love the most, and they're still the things I love the most. I love when I can tell a story and there's actually evidence for my story. So I grew up with two attorneys as parents, and I now have my brother's also an attorney, so I'm the only non-attorney in my family. So this idea of sort of making your case with good data and evidence was definitely also a part of my life. And so I would say sort of the math, the English, and the what I'll call sort of the argument were all really important. And, in terms of sort of so that's sort of interests, right? In terms of behaviors, I think from a really young age, I felt called to lead. So, we're all different. Whenever I'm in a situation where there's a problem and a bunch of people standing there, my first inclination is to help that group of people get organized to solve the problem. And I've been like that for as long as I can remember.
Yeah. Called to lead.
Called to lead. Yeah. It's the combination of feeling, I feel like I have been given so many things and I feel a responsibility to use the opportunities and experiences that I have to make things better.
Yeah. So help us understand your path to GOJO.
So like I said, I grew up in Cleveland Heights and then in Shaker. And I ended up going off to Brown University for college. My dad had gone to Brown. I didn't really have a better reason than that. I liked it. I liked my dad. Seemed like a cool place. I was pretty achievement oriented, and so and worked hard. And I like to sort of set stretch goals for myself. And so going to Brown was a stretch goal, and I ended up there. While I was at Brown, I had no idea what I wanted to study. Like I said, my whole family, lots and lots of attorneys and business people. And I was at this liberal arts school where there wasn't pre-law or business. And so my first year, I took like one of everything. I took freshman psychology, freshman economics, sociology, like I one of everything, statistics. And the class that I loved the most my freshman year was public policy. It was a course that was really designed against solving problems through policy. And so it was very practical. It was not a theoretical course. We looked at issues like, okay, if there have been, if motorcycle deaths are causing both a negative impact on society and also costing lots and lots of money, what are all the different tools that policymakers could use to improve outcomes? And so we would look at lots and lots of different possibilities. We would evaluate all of those different approaches. We would try to understand them in terms of their impact on human life, both the life of the people for whom injury would be prevented, but also liberty and people who enjoy riding motorcycles and people who are in cars and have motorcycles around them. And we would also look at things like the economic impact, both the cost of these programs and then their economic impact. And I just fell in love. It was like perfect. It was a combination of math and storytelling and negotiation because you had to get people to get on board with your programs. And so I ended up majoring at Brown. They call it concentrating in public policy. It was a degree that was at Brown's kind of funny. So there aren't like pure majors. So public policy was a combination of political science, economics, sociology, statistics, philosophy. So I ended up at Bain, frankly, because I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And they came on campus to recruit. And when I went to their presentation, essentially what they said is, we do the same stuff you're doing in your public policy program, but we do it for companies. So we have a hard problem. Nobody knows what to do about it. We've got data, we've got resources to go learn things, but nobody knows the answer. And that's the work. And so, whether it was, I helped the Talbot's business decide what they should do about their men's and kids stores and J. Jill. I worked on direct store distribution for Nabisco after they were bought by Kraft. So, should they continue to do that? Should they stock the shelves themselves or let other people do it? really
Yeah.
interesting problems. And I loved this combination of trying to understand why they were doing the things they were doing, why they thought it wasn't working, and then coming up with many alternatives, assessing them, and picking a path forward. Like
Yeah.
it really appealed.
It's quite aligned with the solving problems and telling stories.
Yeah, it was a
Framing.
perfect fit. And I love the people. I think an important lesson from my Bain time was that culture really matters a lot. The work you're doing is incredibly important, but the people you're doing it with and around all day, every day, ultimately has just as big an impact on, at least on my satisfaction. And I loved the culture at Bain. It was a work hard, play hard culture. People had a good sense of humor. They didn't take themselves too seriously, even though we all took the work we were doing seriously. I think it was very high integrity. So, my first week, we talked about the sunshine test. Like, we do not do things that we would not be comfortable having on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. That really resonated with me. That's how I've tried to lead my whole life. And so being in a professional context where I knew that I could be really honest about how I felt about things and speak up if I was concerned was really important to me. And so it was just a great fit all around. And I felt like Bain really invested in my development and growth and gave me incredible opportunities.
I imagine from Bain, kind of the world is your oyster. What ultimately was exciting to you about GOJO, and how did you kind of navigate a transition to within the company?
Yeah, so a couple steps from Bain. So I was in Bain sent me back to business school, so I went and got an MBA, and then came back to Bain and worked for Bain in London, Amsterdam, and then back in Boston. I got to see lots and lots and lots of businesses. Increasingly, as much as I love the firm and the work, that part of me that wants to be a leader and make change was like screaming, like, I want to do it. I don't just want to advise on it. And so I was starting to feel like I wanted to run something, or at least be on a path to running something. And so in 2010, my husband and I had our first kid, Francis, who's now 15. And we were living in Boston, and I was working for Bain. And I was having these feelings about like wanting to sort of go out and be more of a leader, more of an executive, and more of a direct impact kind of person. Honestly, really, my husband, Brett, was the one who said, like, let's try Cleveland. He loved it. He's not from Cleveland, but he had spent a lot of time in Cleveland with my family. My family is, we're actually 8th generation Clevelanders on my dad's side. So we have a long history in this town, and my parents have always been very involved, have always encouraged us to be very involved. We're the family when the out-of-town boyfriend visits, you have to go to the art museum every time, just to appreciate how awesome University Circle is. And, you have
which
to,
it is.
Which it is. And so he really loved Cleveland, and he said that it's a place where we can go and have a real impact in a way that we probably can't in Boston. And we can raise our daughter around my family, and also his mom is close. And so we made the move. So we moved back here in 2010, right after we had Francis. And I stayed with Bain during the transition, but I knew I wanted to do something else. And so I did this very thorough job search in Cleveland. Anyone who asks me, which is lots of people, how you look for a job in Cleveland, the answer is you meet with lots and lots of people. You do that over breakfast, lunch, and dinner until the people you meet with recommend you meet with people you've already met with. Like, that's when you know you're done, right? When every recommendation and introduction you get, you've already had. So I went through that process and ended up with an incredible opportunity to join Dealer Tire. So Scott and Dean Mueller had built this amazing business, which was the foundations of which were actually their grandfather and father's business, but they had really taken this business and scaled it. I think when I joined, the revenues were around $600 million, and they'd only been at it for 10 years. And so I had the opportunity to join that business and work directly for Scott at the beginning, sort of running strategy. And then, but our deal was that if I came on board, he would find a way to get me P&L responsibility, which is the thing I knew I needed to ultimately be a CEO. And so he said, "Yep, I promise." And he was good for his word. About a year in, they gave me finance. So I learned how to run FP&A, and I ran the budget process, and I got a bunch of sort of line experience that way. And then they ultimately gave me responsibility for about half the business through managing the car company relationships there. And it was my first real kind of P&L responsibility. It was high stakes because I had responsibility for these contracts that renewed annually that were really large. So like the Mercedes contract or the BMW contract. Back then, we didn't have a ton of customers, and each customer was really, really important. And so that was just an incredible experience. And so I did that for a couple of years, and then I ultimately ended up moving over to run the family office for the family who owns GOJO today, the Camphor family. And they had set up the family office to oversee their investments in non-GOJO assets. So they had about, at the time, 15 direct control investments in startups, and then GOJO. And so, again, I said, okay, I'll come do this, but if I'm going to be responsible for these 15 in sort of startup investments, I also need to understand GOJO, because I need to think like you think. I can't be divorced from sort of the core business. And so they put me on the GOJO board and gave me responsibility for the startup portfolio. And so that was 2014. And I did that for a couple of years. And together we made the decision that there was so much opportunity at GOJO that I should come in-house and work here instead.
That's an amazing journey.
Yeah.
How would you describe what GOJO is?
So, what we say sort of on paper is we're the largest B2B skincare company in the world. Our business before the pandemic was about 2/3 soap and only 1/3 sanitizer. And it was 90% B2B and only 10% consumer. So people might have thought, okay, this PURELL business is a consumer sanitizer business. We were actually a B2B soap business first. And I could go through the whole GOJO founding story, and it's awesome. So I'm happy to talk about it. But at its heart, we really started, the business was really started by Jerry and Goldie Lippman. And it was started on this concept of making dirty hands clean and solving a real human problem. And that's really what we still do today. We solve real human problems. We are obsessed with the combination of safety and efficacy. So we want to give people no trade-off protection from dirt and germs, both on their skin and on the surfaces they touch. And we're not satisfied. We don't launch a technology until it has both safety and efficacy.
Yeah. Well, I would take you up on the time machine journey if you'll indulge a little detour, but I always think it's fascinating to understand the origins. If we're going back to the 1940s in Akron, and, we're in the context of World War II, the conditions that are true that unlocked this opportunity, especially in the history of Ohio with just rubber manufacturing and the second order effects of that, which I don't think are necessarily obvious if you're just to think about it, that this place being the global leader in the manufacturing of, this kind of material creates that kind of opportunity. It's really fascinating. So I would love to hear how it came to be.
Yeah, I'm happy to tell the story. And I think it is, as a girl who grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and really believed in sort of the American dream, I think the GOJO founding story is like a perfect example of, when I was growing up, what I imagined that to be. So Goldie and Jerry lived in Akron, Ohio, and it was 1946. And Jerry he was a cookie salesman. He had a 10th grade education, and he was from all accounts, I did not know Jerry, but from all accounts, he was just a great guy, friendly, funny, interested in things, interested in people. He's the kind of guy, the ways he interviewed people for jobs is he would leave a broom on the floor near the door. And if you came in for your job interview and stepped over the broom, he would just nicely dismiss you. Like, he wanted the person who picked the broom up. Like, he just was a good guy, a good guy with great values and a lot of ambition and energy. And so Goldie was working in a rubber factory. She had gotten that job sort of as many women did at the time, right after World War II. There weren't a lot of the men weren't around to work in those factories. And so Rosie the Riveter style, she ended up in a rubber factory. And in the factory where she worked, at the end of a long day, her hands and the hands of all of her colleagues were covered in carbon black and grease. And so what the men had done for years and what they taught these women to do was dip their hands in either benzene or kerosene and then use a rag to rub off the carbon black and grease. And, Goldie felt like this was just a bad idea. It smelled bad. It seemed like it was not maybe that safe. And it was really damaging her skin and many other women's skin. And, having nice hands at the time was important. And so they were not excited about this. And so she came home and, was chatting with Jerry and telling him about this. And she said, there's just got to be a better way. And so Jerry, who was a cookie salesman, said, you're probably right, Goldie, there's got to be a better way. But I don't know what it is. But let's go find out. And so one of Jerry's long held beliefs was that he would say, everything I know, I learned from someone else. Like he believed that you go out in the world and find the answers. It's not important that you're the smartest person in the room. What's important is that when there's a question and you don't know the answer, you go look and you ask lots of people. And so he went to Kent State University, which was nearby. The man had not gone to college himself, did not have a college degree, but he had the courage to just walk in there and walk the halls and ask around. And he ended up finding a guy named Clarence Cook, who was a professor. He was a chemistry professor. And fortunately, Clarence Cook, by chance, had done a lot of work looking at how to remove lanolin from wool as part of trying to figure out how to make uniforms during World War II less hot, right? So they had to figure out how to get this lanolin out of the wool for the production of uniforms. And so he knew a lot about emollients and oil. And so using that knowledge and his knowledge of chemistry and Jerry's knowledge of the problem, the real human problem, the two of them set to developing the first formula. And it became our GOJO Original Cream. And it's a product we made literally until just a couple years ago. And it was a product that they mixed in the basement at Jerry's mom's house. So he used her old washing machine, and we have it here in the building. It's a crank washing machine, and they would mix up the formula in the basement. And then it was, right after World War II, there was no tin available for cans. And so he would drive around on his old cookie route and go see all the old delis and places that he delivered cookies. And he would pick up their used pickle jars. And so he picked up all these used pickle jars. He would take it home, he'd wash them out, and they would pack the original cream in these cookie jars. And then they sold it. And Goldie was the bookkeeper and ultimately played a really important role in both pricing and in financing. And there's some cool stories about how she sort of saved the business in that way. And Jerry was the salesman. So he'd go out in the street and sell the product. And it was right at the time when cars were becoming ubiquitous and service stations were popping up on every corner. And so he went to all these service stations. And the way he sold the product is he would put a scoop of the cream cleaner on his hand. He would sort of hide it. He'd walk in and ask for the head mechanic. Head mechanic would come out. He would put his hand out to shake the guy's hand, and they'd shake hands. And then the mechanic would look and be like, ew, what did you put on my hand? And Jerry said that typically the guy would wipe his hand off, preparing to hit Jerry in the face. And when he wiped his hand off, he would notice that the grime that had been on his hands was gone, and he had a clean streak on his hand. And so right before he hit Jerry, he'd say, how does this stuff work? And so Jerry said 9 out of 10 times he'd get the sale, and 1 out of 10 times he'd get punched in the nose. So that was his sort of original approach to selling. And he was tremendously successful very quickly because there was a real human problem, and this product solved it squarely in a no-frills way. And so the business started to grow. They were manufacturing. They brought in their first employee, this woman, Eleanor Morris. She ate lunch in their kitchen, in the kitchen of their house. And to this day, we still have peanut butter and jelly and popcorn every day for our team as sort of a tribute to those early days when the three of them broke bread together. And, the business grew a ton in those early days. And then I can tell you the story if you want, but basically, as the business was becoming more and more successful, the cost of the product started creating new problems. And so that inspired Jerry to continue to innovate.
Yeah. What a legendary founding entrepreneurial journey. That's incredible. Wow. So many different directions we could go from here. I guess one thing you mentioned that I always find really interesting to explore in the context of a business like GOJO is this multi-generational, component to it, and how, you mentioned kind of the sunsetting of the original product. When you consider GOJO as a third generation family enterprise now, that this tension between how to best honor the legacy and pay homage to the history, and you mentioned the values, the founding principles, so that foundation while simultaneously innovating, and all the chapters that GOJO has evolved through, since then.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I'm sure lots of people you would interview in businesses like this would say that's really hard, and that's a tension that they manage. I will be honest. There are some things about our culture and about the way that Jerry and Goldie started the business, and just their system of beliefs and values from early on, that have made that actually the opposite of hard for us. Like we are geared to always evolve, and we see that as a good thing. So, but what always stays the same. So we have a purpose, which is saving lives and making life better through well-being solutions. It's really a long way of saying we solve real human problems. And then we have values and guiding principles, which have really been the same for 80 years. Those are things like better together. Like we really believe that more people around the table with different competencies are going to come up with better solutions. We have uncompromising integrity. And that is not just about the individual decisions people make and making high integrity individual decisions. It's about the responsibility we all have to talk straight, to speak up. When you're in a meeting, no matter what your title is or how long you've been at GOJO, if you hear something that sounds wrong or stupid or silly or misaligned to our values, the expectation is that you'll raise your hand and speak up. Always learning is one of our values. And I think when you have a value that is always learning, and guiding principles that include things like, we experiment and keep what works, you're geared to be an organization that is predisposed to change, because if you're not changing, you're not really learning and growing. And we want to learn and grow. It's who we are. And then lastly, we have one of our values is bold leadership. And one of the guiding principles under bold leadership is we courageously take on challenges no one else will, and inspire others. Like you can't believe that that's who you are and also resist taking in new information from the outside world and evolving. So it's actually in some ways been the easiest thing in the world to keep evolving as a business and to be a market making innovator, because we have those values and guiding principles that we've had for 80 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. With at least two of those in mind, this kind of always learning and bold leadership. I would be remiss to not ask you about, the pandemic a little bit. So you had exposure to the business for 10 years, a decade, and you assumed the role of CEO in the very beginning of 2020, just like weeks before this pandemic rolls out, when I think GOJO is already on a world stage, but now the spotlight quite obviously focused and centered on exactly the set of problems that you've positioned yourself to solve. What was it like stepping into leadership of the whole organization at a time? And we don't have to rehash the whole pandemic here, but in the face of like infinite overnight demand for your product, how that crisis experience shaped the way that you lead and plan, and how you carry those values and principles with you through a very adverse period of time.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for not making me relive the whole pandemic.
I don't want to either.
It was a special time. I would say that I have not a day goes by that I am not grateful that GOJO was the GOJO it was when I came into my role, and also that I was who I was. Like I feel like it was the right combination for that moment. And what I really mean is, you had this organization that at the time was 75 years old, that had this incredible purpose, this sense of purpose, and every person in the organization had that sense of purpose. It had been there for decades and decades. And you had these values where we really articulated like what we do and why we do it. like how we behave and why. And then, I was in the role as a new leader. And, as we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, like I'm wired in that moment not to step up and direct. The way I'm wired is to figure out what is the unique role I can play to unlock the capability and capacity of the group of people who are with me. And like that's the way I feel called to lead. I don't feel called to lead to stand up on a table and tell people what to do. The pull I feel is to play my role in the group to help the group figure out how to be as successful as possible and conquer whatever challenge we have. And so, especially at a time when there was no playbook, it was an unprecedented situation. And there were people who had experience with pieces of what happened, right? There were people at GOJO who had been through H1N1 or SARS or Ebola. And so there was experience and expertise that was really important. And it was also a novel application. Like that's the moment that that my particular style of leadership was best suited for, which is let's all sit around the table. I want everybody here to tell everybody else here, not me, but everybody else here, what you think we should do and why. And then let's have a really robust debate. And then if we reach consensus, great. And if we don't, I'm going to do my job and make a decision. But that decision is going to be informed by everybody else here offering their very best point of view and us having a discussion. And I'm really comfortable doing that. Some people aren't, right? But I'm also comfortable changing my mind the next day if we learn something new. And we had to do a lot of that too. And so I think GOJO's culture, the incredible people we had, with all the experience they had and all the heart they had for our purpose, and my style of leadership were a really good combination.
I mean, it certainly sounds like it. Quite emblematic of bold leadership, meeting the moment. When you're in that moment, how, like outside of that rigorous debate that you're having internally, how are you weighing kind of the long-term thinking and what GOJO, the plans that you had for not, next month, as the crisis kind of transpires, but where you wanted to take the organization, in years, and how to, balance like the plans that you had in place and the strategies around that relative to this moment in time?
So, there's the cliche, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. And I think that was true in our day-to-day response, which we just talked about with my leadership team. I think it was also true in terms of our mid and longer term planning with the owners of the business and the gentleman who had just retired as president. So Joe Camphor, Marcella Camphor-Rolnick, who's executive chair now and was executive chair during the pandemic, and then Mark Lerner, who had just retired as president. The four of us sort of were an unofficial leadership molecule for the business. We formally had a board, and the board was useful too, but the four of us day to day were sort of processing a lot of what was happening and doing a lot of I would say strategic work and strategic planning together. It was really nice because Joe and Mark had really run the business together for 30 years. Marcella had been around for much of that time in increasing roles of leadership. And then I was new in my role, but had worked with also that group now for about 5 years. And so the four of us were able to do some healthy dividing and conquering. And so that group did some mid and longer term planning that ended up becoming extraordinarily important, not just to our response to the pandemic, but to what has happened since then over the last 5 years. And I'll just give you one example. We made a decision as a group to invest about $400 million, which was more than the excess profit that came in during 2020, back into the business to do two things. First of all, to ensure that we would have capacity to respond to future surges. So imagine making that decision when you're in the middle of that pandemic, taking that money and investing for the next pandemic, which could be a year away or 20 years away. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing that did for us is it gave us supply security It allowed us to onshore and vertically integrate in a bunch of places where we felt like there was supply chain risk we had observed in that moment. And today, as tariffs, the tariff environment is very uncertain, a lot of those decisions that we made are paying off in ways that some ways we anticipated and some ways we didn't.
How would you describe where GOJO is today, and what are you excited about looking forward, having made those investments, and how it's evolved since?
Yeah, so it has been a really complicated 5-year period. We believe that demand that actually came in terms of orders was at about 16x for most of 2020. And really it was infinite, because if people could have submitted more orders, they would have. 21, was soft in the back half, and because you really didn't have people back in public spaces, you had the Delta and the Omicron variants. People weren't really fully back out in public. 22, people started to be back out in public, but there was a bunch of bad product out there sort of taking up space. By 23, things were starting to normalize at the end, but we had to do all kinds of things that we tried to be really public and transparent about to get our business back in a healthy place. I'm delighted to say that 24 was the second best year in the company's history after 2020. So we are back and better than we were in 2019, both in terms of the amount of people who we are impacting, which is all about our purpose, the number of sort of doses of hand hygiene and surface hygiene we're putting out in the world, but also in terms of our financial strength and stability. We're really firing on all cylinders. We had an amazing 24. 25 is off to a really strong start. The PURELL brand, I just was looking at a bunch of the metrics around brand health equity, and it is substantially stronger than it was in 2019. And there are places where it actually is continuing to increase, which is a little counterintuitive coming out of the pandemic. And then our consumer business, our share in consumer has more than doubled since before the pandemic, and the market is substantially larger. We're continuing to innovate there and tell our story. We launched hand sanitizing spray in the last year, which people love. And we really feel like it's in some ways it's our golden hour. I mean, the business is doing better than any of us could have even imagined.
Yeah. What is your philosophy on brand? PURELL is obviously such a strong brand and has become that much stronger, in the aftermath of all of this. How do you think about what brand is and where you would like to take it ultimately?
Yeah. So there's a gentleman here named Dave Brownlee, who is he sort of has, leadership responsibility for the PURELL brand, and he would give you a much better answer. What I will tell you is the way I think of the brand as the CEO is that our brand is a promise. That's what a brand is. It's a promise. And so when somebody picks up a product that is a PURELL product, there are a set of things that they believe are going to be true about that product and that experience. And it's our job every time to meet or exceed that set of expectations. And when we do that, the strength of the brand grows. And when we don't do that, the strength of the brand diminishes. And for us, the things that product needs to do to be a PURELL product is, first and foremost, it needs to deliver on the safety and the efficacy that are at the standard that we hold ourselves to. It also has to deliver on what we call good for you, which is beyond safety and efficacy for the person using it. It's about the way that product affects the world. And so good for you means that the product is, it is the most sustainable solution we can offer today based on the technology that's available. It means that it's not just good for you, the person using it, but it's protecting the people you're trying to protect. So if you're a new nurse using the product, I can make it safe and effective for you. There are tons of ways every day tons of decisions we have to make every day that get at this issue of am I reinforcing the things about the brand and strengthening it, or am I weakening it? And there are temptations every day in a business to do things that weaken your brand. And so we have lots of healthy debate and dialogue. So it's a moving target. And I think it's also not that complicated at its core.
Right. Well, and it channels, the values, always learning, this willingness to change your mind, conviction where you have it, but, then course correcting capabilities along the way. Yes. It's really interesting. kind of longer term, higher level, up in the air stuff, how do you think about what success means ultimately?
So, one of the great things about having a purpose in a business is you always have a yardstick. And so, with the purpose of saving lives and making life better through well-being solutions, we can ask ourselves every day, are we doing more of that today than we did yesterday? Are we saving more lives and making more lives better? There was a time when we sort of set a BHAG for ourselves of delivering health and well-being to 1 billion people a day. And so that's one measure.
Wow. Yeah. That is a BHAG.
It's a BHAG.
Yeah.
Right after we set that goal, Coca-Cola came out and said they wanted to serve beverages to 1 billion people a day. And we're like, ooh, if that's something that's actually like a big stretch goal for them, maybe it's a really big stretch goal for us. It's like a moment of humility, right? But we did measure ourselves on that for many, many years. And at the peak of the pandemic, we in 2020, we made 140 billion doses of PURELL. So you're getting close. You're getting in the 300 to 400, million people a day kind of territory. And we're still around, we're in that range today with all the products that we make. We challenge ourselves constantly on how we take the incredible strategic assets we have in this business, which is really a platform. We have a management team, a broader GOJO team, and a set of assets that probably, could do what we do in a business that's 3 or 4 times as big as we are. And so how do we keep finding those new places where there are real human problems, there are jobs to be done that we have a right to do, that makes sense for us to do? And then how do we use our innovation process, our relationships with our distributor partners and customers, our brand, and our other strategic assets to just continue to expand our impact?
How do you personally think about success?
I would love to be someone who has a great long-term plan that I'm executing against. I am so strategic in business. I think personally, I've been less strategic. I have a family, so certainly some part of my success is that I'm making their lives better, like that I'm a net positive contributor, the most net positive contributor I can be to my family's lives. And that's not just my kids and my husband, but my parents and my brother and his family, right? I want to be a good human and enrich those relationships. Outside of my direct professional work, I mentor and coach tons of people. I think one of the ways that we can rise to the responsibility of that matches what we've been given, and when we're in roles like mine, is to be very generous with our network and with our, it's hard to be generous with your time because you don't have that much of it, but I can be very generous with my network and with connections. And so I try, like I was driving in this morning and I had a half hour in the car, and I used that half hour to talk to an entrepreneur who's scaling her business, who had a challenging thing that she's working through, and we talked through it. And I'm always quick to say, have you thought about this? You should talk to this person. Let me make a connection. So I do a lot of that, and that feels like success to me. That's part of success. Professionally, I am deeply connected to success for the people in my business. Like I don't have a job. My job is only exists because this business exists and the people who are here exist. And so getting a lot of sort of professional success and accomplishments is way less meaningful to me than us together accomplishing the things we want to accomplish. And I admire that in other people, and I aspire to be that kind of person myself.
Yeah. I share that aspiration. I really feel success comes from other people's success in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And the whole generosity of giving of yourself and kind of giving first is also quite reflective of the whole spirit of this podcast too. So that also resonates a lot.
For sure. Yeah. Which is why I'm so excited you're doing it, because it's the kind of work, I remember when I took macroeconomics for the first time, and I'll be honest, I'm more of a microeconomics person. Like
I am as well.
Macro still, I'm not sure I get it. But one thing I do get is the multiplier effect. And if you're not moving relationships and information and opportunities around, you are losing an opportunity to multiply them dramatically. And we all need more is better. So in terms of those things. So I think we all have a role to play in that, and it's actually not that hard and it's kind of fun. So I encourage everybody I know to do that more.
Yeah. Awesome. What other earned wisdom do you feel that you've picked up on this journey that is particularly, salient to you?
I don't have a ton of wisdom. A couple things I'll mention that we haven't talked about just because I think they're important. The first is just sort of mental and physical health. So I am obsessed with getting enough sleep. It's really hard. I have a bunch of kids and a crazy job and do a bunch of other things. I travel all the time. But I really believe that getting like 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night versus 6 or 5 has an outsized impact on my effectiveness and also the pleasantness of interacting with me. And which also is tied to my effectiveness. So I preach sleep, and
Yeah.
I don't think we get enough of it. I also think having something in your life, whether it's a hobby or whether it's exercise or whether it's meditation, having some things in your life that help you maintain perspective, calm down, get quiet, that has been tremendously helpful for me. I've been practicing yoga for more than 20 years. I teach yoga. And I practice still many times a week. I practice in hotel rooms in every country I've ever been in, and in airports and offices, and in a world that often feels very out of control. Having some practices that are portable that you can carry with you and do anywhere that ground you, I think I highly recommend it. So those are the two things that we didn't really talk about.
Well, those certainly resonate. I'll pull on that thread actually in the context of health and wellness. I mean, the business is tangentially related to those things. What do you wish more people understood about hygiene and well-being and these sets of things that GOJO participates in?
And in our space, if I look at sort of cleaning and hygiene, there's a lot of common sense that we can all apply that helps us keep both ourselves and the people around us healthy and well. So I'll just give you an example. So, I don't tell people they should sanitize their hands 500 times a day. When they ask me, I say, hey, if you're going to touch a surface that is likely to have a bunch of germs on it, which is typically a common surface, then right after you do that would be a great time to sanitize your hands. If you're going to eat food or touch your eyes or prepare food for someone else or touch someone else's face, like your kid, or, that would be a great time to sanitize before you do that thing. Right. So, and if I look at the products that are out there on the market, most people don't read the labels. They don't read the labels on common products. So most of the wipes that are in kids' schools, if you actually read the label, it says you should be wearing PPE and you should wash the surface with water after you apply the product. People don't do that. And so
people do not do that.
We do not do that. Now, our product, our PURELL wipes and our PURELL spray, the standard for us to come out with a product that was going to wipe surfaces that people touch with their hands and that kids eat food on was that it has to be no rinse, food contact safe, and you can't have to wear PPE to apply it. And so our products do that. I wish people read the packages and the labels and that they cared about their own health and well-being as much as I do, because I think we'd have a healthier, happier society. But I can't do that. What I can do is make products available that, that meet that standard and continue to educate where we can.
What do you think would surprise Jerry and Goldie were they, here to observe the state of it today about how the business has evolved and just where it is?
So, this is where I would tap Joe or Marcella, who could speak much more eloquently about, their aunt and great aunt and uncle and great uncle. My sense from what I know of Jerry and Goldie is they would be incredibly proud of the number of lives that this business has impacted, not just out in the world with our products, though that would be tremendously satisfying. But, I think they would be really proud of the lives of all the families and the communities that they've touched, building a really, high integrity business in Akron. I think that would be meaningful to them. I got a note from a team member last night who has going through some health challenges, and she sent me the note that the subject was gratitude. And I read the note, and she was sending the note to tell me about the ways that her supervisor has shown up for her through these health challenges and what that has meant to her and her family. And to recognize that supervisor, and then also to thank GOJO for creating a culture that rewards people and promotes people who have that set of values and a context where that person can behave that way and treat this team member the way that she has. And, I teared up reading this last night at 10 o'clock, that the person had taken the time to send the note, that her supervisor had made such a difference in her life, and that GOJO had created a context where everyone could be their best self in a really hard moment. And I think Goldie and Jerry, from what I know of them, that's exactly the kind of company that they would want GOJO to be.
That's amazing. So I was catching up recently with a friend who's a founder who's also been on the show before, and he mentioned to me that an alternative tagline, of sorts for this podcast could be the biggest, most interesting, most successful things in Northeast Ohio that way more people should know about that maybe they don't. And I feel GOJO is kind of emblematic of the sentiment, very much as such an iconic Northeast Ohio story kind of woven into the fabric. Geographically of this place, of Akron, of Northeast Ohio for 80 years now. How do you think about the place that we are, Northeast Ohio, and what being part of this community, both for you personally and for the company, has meant?
Yeah, I love this question. So, I'm a Cleveland girl through and through, I love where I'm from, but I love even more living here. I think there's a lot of people who are from Cleveland, who I grew up with, who love Cleveland. They love where they're from, but they live somewhere else now. I get both. I get to be from here, which I'll talk about in a minute. Has a lot of things that come with it. And I get to live here, which has a bunch of benefits. So I think when you're from this area, you grew up in a place that wasn't necessarily cool or hip. Like when I was growing up here in the 80s, Cleveland was the punchline of lots of jokes. We were going through our own industrial transformation as a city, trying to figure out who we were going to be as heavy industry sort of, declined here. And so that made me scrappy and tough in a way that is that I appreciate. The people I grew up with here nothing was sort of handed to us. It was like, you make your own luck, you work hard, you have good values, you work with good people, you do good things, and that doesn't guarantee you anything, but it's certainly a condition for success, right? The opposite doesn't work. I think. I think also growing up here, my sense of the place is that we talked a lot more about what was the same than what was different between us. That could be good or it could be bad, but for me, what it did is I grew up not feeling like I needed, I know how to be around a lot of really different people and to appreciate them and to also respect that we're different and not. We talk a lot at GOJO about the fact that this is a place where you don't have to talk about stuff from outside work unless you want to. It's a place where we come together to do common work, and that's what we talk about together. And there's so much that we have in common. There's so much that's the same about us that it's really rewarding to show up and be a team and focus on common work. And I feel like that was what it was like growing up here. And that just seems different than other people's experiences. And so what's it like to live here now? Well, part of why we moved our kids back here or moved back here to raise our kids was that we felt like it was a place where they could grow up with those same values that I grew up with. They could grow up feeling both responsibility for their community and for making things better, and also some appreciation for all the things that that they have here, in a way that frankly for me today would be a little tougher in some other environments. So I love being from Northeast Ohio. I think the humility and the grittiness and sense of responsibility and the sense of community is makes me both happier and better as a person.
I think the one thing, because it's just kind of in my mind, and you mentioned it a few times, this idea of rigorous debate. How do you hold the space for the most effective way to have vigorous debate, where people can be very disagreeable, but the tactics a bit of like, how do you have those kinds of arguments and have them be productive?
Yeah, so I'll talk about both the process and structure, because I think that's important and helpful, and I'll also just talk about sort of values. So, and I'll start with values first. So, I demand that we are polite to each other and kind to each other. Like I have no patience for people being nasty or rude or dismissive or yelling, or like all that stuff is just not. I don't think it helps anything get done better or faster. So, and I get, like I said, there's not a lot of things I do as a leader where I'm like dictatorial, but that's one. Like, and I think our culture in general is, it's not like I have to enforce that against people's will. I think our culture in general is a culture of mutual respect and civil discourse and discussion. But also I think process and structure really help. And we have, since the 90s, we've had an approach to how we do work that is just very different. It's custom. It's sort of like something that Joe and his contemporaries created in the 90s. And part of it is that we have this venue structure. So we essentially have time in the week where people show up who have been invited to be there, but it's a placeholder for topics to come in. And we have a pretty rigorous, robust process where topics can get themselves scheduled into these buckets of time in front of these groups of people. And so, for example, here on Mondays, we have a couple of hours that we call operations venue. And any operational topics that need discussion, enrichment, or decision-making schedule themselves into that time period. And they know they have the right set of people in the room to hear out the topic, discuss, debate it, and make a decision. The same thing is true on Friday mornings on commercial topics. The same thing is true on Wednesday afternoons with innovation-related topics. And so by creating these spaces that are set up for somebody to bring in a topic, bring in good information, there's like standards for how you show up for that environment, but you've got people there who are coming prepared to discuss, debate, and decide. My experience has been that those good practices actually facilitate really good discussion and decision making. It's very different than in other organizations where you might set up an ad hoc meeting to make a decision on a topic and invite people, and they sort of people are coming into the room ready for a fight. Like you have people coming in who have one position and people have another position, and it's really adversarial. Like we don't do that. We're all running the business together. We have these places we show up to adjudicate issues that apply, and we all show up to do that work together as a team. It's very team-based. And we come up with the right decisions. And if it's the wrong decision, that topic's going to show up again next week and the week after. So we'll get another run at it.
Yeah. That's cool. I appreciate you sharing that. All right. So we can ground it out here. I'll ask our traditional closing question, unless you have any other, kind of parting thoughts, but it's for a hidden gem in the area, for something that other people should know about that perhaps they don't.
So, I'm going to have to go with University Circle. I didn't tell you this story, but my mom, when I was little, was a professor. She was a law professor at Case and then worked at Case. And so she would bring my brother and I would go down there sometimes on weekends when she was working, and we would crawl around in the closets of the law school, which are all connected, which is, I don't know if they still are, but it was pretty cool. But before and after we would, do work at her office while she worked, we would go to the Natural History Museum and see Steggy, or we would go to the Cleveland Museum of Art where, from a very young age, my parents would say, these pieces of art will become your old friends and you can always come see them. Like it's a place where you can always come back to. The Cleveland Museum of Art is free and open to the public every day for all of time. And you can always go visit your friends at the Cleveland Museum of Art, your favorite pieces, right? We would go on Thursday nights when I was a little girl. My dad would take me to see the orchestra at Severance, and we'd have dinner before at Nighttown. So the magic of University Circle for me is something that was supersized when I was a little kid. I couldn't believe that this place existed that had all these incredible treasures. And I still feel exactly that same way today about University Circle. So that's my hidden gem.
Yeah, it is magic. And I love that framing of art as friends. That I'm going to use that. Well, Carey, I just want to thank you for coming on, for sharing your story. It's really incredible what you're working on, and that it's here. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for doing the work you're doing to multiply all of the wonderful things about our amazing area.
Thank you. If people had anything they wanted to follow up about or learn more about GOJO or otherwise, where would you direct them?
So if they want to learn about the company, a lot of our history is on our website. And obviously they could follow us on social media, where we talk a lot about what's going on today. And then, if they're curious about how they could become a hand sanitizer, soap, or surface products customer, they could certainly reach out, and we would be happy to get them into our wonderful, safe, and effective solutions.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Carey.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. So if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm or find us on Twitter @podlayoftheland or @sternhefe, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with the Up Company, LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.